What if I told you that one of the most groundbreaking teen dramas in television history didn't come from Hollywood, didn't feature glamorous actors, and didn't tie every storyline up in a neat bow? What if I told you it came from a modest Canadian production that dared to show kids as they really were? Awkward, messy, confused, and often left to figure things out on their own. That's the magic of Degrassi Junior High, a series that didn't just entertain, it reflected reality back at its audience in ways that were uncomfortably raw for its time and still resonate today. Before shows like Skins, Euphoria, or even Degrassi: The Next Generation, there was Junior High, quietly rewriting the rules of what teen television could look like. And today, we're diving deep, exploring the history, the behind-the-scenes decisions, the iconic storylines, and the messy brilliance that made Degrassi Junior High unforgettable. This is not a sugar-coated nostalgia trip. It's a serious exploration of a show that trusted teenagers to handle the truth. So stick around as we unpack it all in 10 parts, each one pulling back another layer of how this series shaped a generation. And while you're here, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop your favorite Degrassi Junior High memory in the comments, because if there's one thing Degrassi taught us,
everybody wants something, they'll never give up.
when you look at the DNA of Degrassi Junior High, you quickly see it didn't appear in a vacuum. It emerged from the television landscape of the 1970s and 1980s, a time when broadcasters suddenly realized they had an untapped audience sitting at home in the late afternoons. Teenagers, these latchkey kids, would come home to empty houses while parents were at work, flipping on the TV at a time slot usually filled with uninspired local programming. Networks realized there was a market for content tailored specifically to this age group. Stories that spoke to their unique problems, their insecurities, and their developing independence. Out of this moment came the after-school special, a genre of television drama that was usually an hour long and tackled issues such as bullying, drug use, pregnancy, divorce, or self-harm. These weren't shows with superheroes or perfect sitcom families swooping in to solve everything. Instead, the kids had to figure it out themselves, sometimes making mistakes, sometimes ending on a somber note. Producer Martin Tassa became synonymous with the genre, creating over 20 of these dramas and setting a precedent that would ripple outward. He once said the point was to show believable problems with believable resolutions, but always ones that left the agency in the hands of the young characters. That ethos became the beating heart of Degrassi. When Linda Schuyler, a schoolteacher turned television producer, and Kit Hood, a director with a knack for low-budget but gritty realism, came together to launch what would eventually become the Degrassi franchise. They absorbed these lessons wholesale. They recognized the power of telling stories that didn't condescend, that didn't rely on adults swooping in, and that trusted kids to be messy and human. You can see the fingerprints of the after-school special all over Degrassi Junior High. The awkwardness of teens fumbling through relationships, the dark reality of predatory adults, the long shadow of addiction, or the simple sting of being betrayed by a friend. But while after-school specials were one-offs, Degrassi transformed that format into a serialized universe, allowing these problems to linger and evolve rather than vanish once the credits rolled. That transformation from episodic morality plays into a lived-in, serialized world was the alchemy that turned Degrassi Junior High into a cultural landmark. And it's why, even decades later, you can trace the DNA of Degrassi in everything from Boy Meets World to Euphoria, the idea that teenagers deserve stories about themselves, not cleaned-up fantasies for adult comfort. Before Degrassi Junior High hit the airwaves in 1987, there was The Kids of Degrassi Street, which premiered in 1979. At first glance, it seems like a natural prequel, but fans and critics alike often debate whether it truly counts as part of the Degrassi canon. The reason: it wasn't about teenagers at all, but about children, elementary-aged kids navigating smaller, less complicated challenges. The tone was softer, the problems less severe, and the audience clearly skewed younger. That alone makes it feel different. But the confusion grows when you realize that some of the same actors who appeared in Kids of Degrassi Street reappeared in Junior High as entirely different characters. Neil Hope, for instance, who played a character named Griff in Kids, would later return as Derek Wheels Wheeler, one of the central figures in Junior High. This casting reuse makes it hard for viewers to accept both shows as existing in the same universe. For that reason, many, including Kat in her retrospective, consider Kids more of a predecessor or proof of concept than an actual chapter in the ongoing Degrassi saga. That said, The Kids of Degrassi Street was vital to the franchise's eventual success. It proved that audiences wanted realistic Canadian programming, and it showed that Schuyler and Hood could balance budget limitations with authentic, grounded storytelling. It even won awards and built a reputation for tackling issues in a way that was accessible to children, while still carrying emotional weight. When the show ended, its creators announced they were moving on to focus on adolescence, a decision that would change the trajectory of teen drama forever. The jump from kids to junior high was seismic. Suddenly, the characters were dealing not with playground squabbles but with puberty, popularity, substance use, sexual curiosity, pregnancy, and predatory adults. The stakes were higher, the tone sharper, and the audience more mature. It was no longer about teaching kids simple lessons, but about reflecting the chaos of early teenage years back at them. And while kids may not be canon, it provided the training ground, the proof of concept, and the confidence needed to create Degrassi Junior High. Without kids, there is no junior high. And without junior high, teen television as we know it looks very, very different. If there's one decision that defined Degrassi Junior High and set it apart from nearly every other teen show before it, it was the decision to cast real teenagers who actually looked and sounded like teenagers. In the mid-80s, it was standard practice in Hollywood to cast 20-somethings as high school students, polishing their appearances with professional wardrobe and makeup. Think of 90210 or even later shows like Glee, where the characters were styled like mini adults. Degrassi took the opposite path. In May of 1986, open auditions were held in Toronto, and over 300 real Canadian teenagers showed up. From them, Linda Schuyler and Kit Hood selected a diverse ensemble of kids who didn't look like models, didn't have polished resumes, and in many cases had never acted before. Those chosen became part of what was called the Repertory Company, or RepCo, a rotating ensemble of actors who essentially made up the student body of Degrassi Junior High. The RepCo model was genius because it made the school feel real. No one actor was elevated as a permanent star. A kid who was a background extra one week could suddenly be the focus of a major storyline the next, just like in a real school where everyone has a story worth telling. But RepCo was more than just casting. It was collaboration. Producers actively listened to the kids, taking their input on slang, dialogue, and realism. Sometimes, their personal experiences directly shaped storylines.
Like, how do you do your hair? With lots of hairspray. And just basically tease it.
Amanda Steptoe, who played Spike, inspired a plot about hair discrimination when she shared her own experiences of being judged for her punk hairstyle. This gave the show a grounding in authenticity that was unmatched. Even wardrobe played into this philosophy. Most of the time, the actors wore their own clothes and styled themselves, which meant the fashion on screen wasn't a stylist's fantasy but a genuine reflection of what Canadian teens wore in the late 1980s. This approach gave Degrassi its timeless charm. Rewatching it now feels less like stepping into a polished TV set, and more like stumbling into a real school frozen in time. The RepCo experiment proved that audiences didn't need their teen idols to look perfect. They wanted them to look real. And in giving the ensemble that authenticity, Degrassi created a world that teenagers trusted, one where they could see their own awkwardness, confusion, and resilience mirrored back at them without the filter of Hollywood gloss. One of the subtle but revolutionary aspects of Degrassi Junior High was how it approached wardrobe, hair, and makeup. And while this might sound like a small detail compared to heavy storylines like teen pregnancy or child abuse, it actually played a massive role in creating the show's authenticity and longevity. In contrast to nearly every other teen drama of the era, Degrassi didn't employ a traditional makeup or costume department in the way American network shows did. Instead, the actors largely dressed themselves, did their own makeup, and styled their own hair, which had two powerful effects. It rooted the show in authenticity, and it allowed characters' appearances to reflect real adolescent identity struggles. Watch an episode now and you'll notice something rare in TV: clothes repeat. The same pair of jeans or jacket will appear again and again because, just like in real life, most kids didn't have endless wardrobes. Some outfits were stylish, some awkwardly mismatched, some obviously chosen by teens who were trying to project confidence but hadn't yet figured out what worked for them. All of which perfectly captured the messy experiment of adolescence. Unlike the designer-heavy aesthetic of Beverly Hills 90210, A few years later, the kids at Degrassi looked like the kids you actually went to school with. This realism helped drive home the relatability of the characters. A perfect example of how wardrobe was used as narrative storytelling was Stephanie K.
Questions. I've ordered him not to talk to me.
It's a good thing you've got different last
Oh,
names.
tell me about it.
Her transformation from just another student to someone trying to reinvent herself as grown-up and popular was marked not by a line of dialogue but by her clothes, tighter skirts, more makeup, provocative style clearly modeled on the glamorous images she'd absorbed from magazines and movies. But here's the twist. The actress herself didn't dress like that in real life. Stephanie's look was intentionally constructed as a contrast to her peers, underscoring her desperation to be seen as more mature than she actually was. Watching her strut down the halls in outfits that screamed trying too hard wasn't just a fashion statement, it was character development. Meanwhile, characters like Spike, with her punk hair and thrift-inspired looks, challenged not just her classmates' perceptions, but audiences as well. In fact, Spike's real-life experiences of being judged for her appearance inspired storylines about bullying and discrimination, showing how wardrobe was more than surface. It was central to the show's DNA. Even seemingly minor details like Lucy's effortlessly chic style reflecting her wealth and independence or Joey Jeremiah's trademark hats gave each character a visual identity that stuck in fans' memories. And beyond individual arcs, the lack of polish in the wardrobe added to the gritty documentary-like feel of the show. When combined with the handheld camera work and the unglamorous Toronto locations, the fashion choices made Degrassi Junior High feel like a real school you could walk into. In a way, the clothes became another character, telling stories about class, personality, aspiration, and insecurity without needing dialogue. That realism still resonates today. It's why rewatching the show feels less like reliving a stylized TV drama and more like flipping through old yearbooks, awkward, dated, and yet incredibly honest. No character embodies the messy contradictions of early adolescence in Degrassi Junior High quite like Stephanie K. And her arc serves as a microcosm of what made the series so daring. It let characters make mistakes, sometimes big ones, without always punishing them neatly or giving them an easy way out. Stephanie begins the series with a self-declared transformation. "I have a new style now," she says, announcing to herself and her peers that she's stepping into a new identity, one modeled on the glamorous older women she's seen in media. But the problem and the heart of her story is that she doesn't yet have the maturity or life experience to back up the image she projects. Her first major storyline, running for student council president, is a perfect example of this contradiction. Initially motivated by a sense of fairness, after her principal suggested only boys would run, Stephanie seems poised to do something admirable. But quickly, her insecurities and craving for male approval take over. She promises kisses to boys who vote for her, leaning into an image of desirability rather than leadership. This move alienates her best friend Vula, who had written her speech, and marks the beginning of Stephanie's recurring pattern, sacrificing friendships and integrity for short-term popularity. What's striking is that the show doesn't frame this as simply Stephanie being bad or Stephanie getting what she deserves. Instead, it paints a painfully realistic portrait of a girl who is desperate to be liked, who wants to be grown up but who hasn't yet developed the tools to navigate those desires. Across the series, Stephanie's choices echo this tension. She drinks before school dances, spreads rumors that she might go all the way on a first date, and even lies about her age to date an older man, leading to a terrifying encounter with a soap opera star who nearly assaults her. In a more moralistic show, these plot lines would end with Stephanie being punished or saved by an adult. But in Degrassi, they often end unresolved. The creepy actor? He drives away when he learns she's 14, and that's it. No justice, no closure, just humiliation and silence. Her repeated betrayals of friends? Sometimes they forgive her, sometimes they don't. But the tension never fully resolves. Even her stint as student council president follows this pattern. After alienating her peers, she vows to take her role seriously, but within episodes she reverts to old behaviors, unable to sustain the growth. This refusal to wrap things up neatly makes Stephanie's arc frustrating but also incredibly authentic, because it mirrors the way many of us stumbled through adolescence, making the same mistakes again and again, learning slowly, unevenly, and sometimes not at all. What's brilliant is that Stephanie isn't framed as uniquely flawed. She's framed as every middle schooler. Magnified, her desperate attempts to act older, her fixation on male validation, her inability to balance ambition with loyalty. These are all experiences many teenagers cycle through, and seeing them on screen was both uncomfortable and validating. By letting Stephanie be messy, contradictory, and unresolved, Degrassi gave audiences something rare: permission to be imperfect themselves. One of the most radical decisions Degrassi Junior High made was how it portrayed adults, or rather how little it relied on them. In most family-oriented or teen-centered shows before Degrassi, parents and teachers were central, often stepping in to offer advice, guidance, or solutions. Think of sitcoms where the episode ended with a parent delivering a heartfelt monologue that tied everything together. Degrassi completely rejected that formula. Adults existed, but they were peripheral, often incompetent, unsympathetic, or downright harmful. This wasn't an accident. It was the guiding philosophy of Linda Schuyler, who believed the show had to reflect the reality that teenagers often dealt with problems alone, without adults swooping in to save the day. This choice was groundbreaking at the time, but also controversial. Contemporary newspaper articles noted the absence of adult problem-solving, some even criticizing the show for portraying parents and teachers so negatively. But for teenagers watching, it rang true. Parents in Degrassi were often divorced, absent, neglectful, or struggling with their own demons. Teachers like Mr. Radich were portrayed as bullies rather than mentors. And most shockingly, the show repeatedly featured adults as predators. Soap opera star Damon King preying on Stephanie, a substitute teacher grooming Lucy, or a hitchhiker targeting Wheels. By including these storylines, the show reflected the darker anxieties of the 1980s, when society was gripped by fears of stranger danger and rising awareness of child abuse. But unlike sensationalized American TV movies that often wrapped these issues in neat endings, Degrassi let them fester. Lucy's harassment by a substitute teacher, for example, doesn't end with instant justice. She doesn't tell anyone right away, and when she finally does, it's only after seeing the predator target another girl. This framing gave power back to the teens, emphasizing their agency rather than adult intervention. What this approach did was shift the entire narrative weight of the show onto the kids. They weren't background characters in stories about families or teachers. They were the protagonists of their own messy lives. Adults could not be trusted to understand, let alone solve, their problems, which left viewers with a show that felt truer to life than anything else on TV. For audiences, especially those watching as teens themselves, this was electrifying. It validated their frustrations, their feelings of isolation, and their skepticism about adult authority. In a way, it was a revolution not just in storytelling but in representation, acknowledging for the first time in mainstream TV that sometimes kids really are on their own. Among the large cast of Degrassi Junior High, Kathleen Mead stands out as one of the most fascinating and frustrating characters, because she embodies a kind of unresolved pain that the show rarely sugarcoated. At first, Kathleen seems like a background antagonist, a judgmental, uptight girl who constantly criticizes her peers and positions herself as morally superior. She's the one who rolls her eyes at Spike's pregnancy, sneers at drinking, and dismisses anything outside her narrow view of normal. But as the series unfolds, audiences start to see the cracks beneath her judgmental surface, and those cracks reveal one of the darkest, most complex portrayals in the entire franchise. Kathleen lives with an alcoholic mother, a situation that forces her into premature adulthood and explains why she is hyper-controlling, critical, and desperate for order. Unlike shows that might neatly resolve such a storyline with a moment of confrontation and healing, Degrassi leaves it open. Kathleen confronts her mom once, calling her a drunk, but the problem doesn't magically go away. There's no adult intervention, no transformation, just the lingering reality of a broken home. The show doesn't return to fix this problem, and that's exactly what made it so authentic. Kathleen's struggles didn't vanish just because the episode ended. They continued to shape her worldview and her interactions with others. Later, Kathleen's pain manifests in an eating disorder storyline, one of the first of its kind on teen television. Her friend Melanie notices the signs: Kathleen's obsessive dieting, her purging habits. But when confronted, Kathleen denies it. The episode ends without resolution, leaving audiences unsettled but also eerily reminded of how eating disorders often persist quietly, hidden behind denial and secrecy. In later episodes, Melanie casually mentions Kathleen's eating disorder, showing that it's still there, unaddressed, haunting her life. And as if that weren't enough, Kathleen's arc extends into Degrassi High, where she becomes the first character in the franchise to experience an abusive relationship with a peer, adding another layer of unresolved trauma. What makes Kathleen's story so powerful isn't just the list of issues she represents, it's the way the show resists tidying them up. Kathleen never has a neat redemption arc. She remains judgmental, often bigoted, sometimes cruel, but audiences who know her background see the pain behind her behavior. It doesn't excuse her homophobia or her cruelty, but it complicates her character in a way that felt revolutionary for teen TV. She isn't a simple villain. She's a victim of circumstances, struggling to control the small things she can while her home life spins out of control. In this way, Degrassi gave viewers a lesson that's as relevant today as it was in the 1980s. Sometimes the people who lash out the most are carrying invisible burdens. And in refusing to resolve Kathleen's arcs, the show gave her a haunting realism, turning her into one of the most memorable cautionary portraits in the Degrassi universe. If Kathleen represents unresolved pain, then Wheels and Spike represent Degrassi Junior High at its most impactful, two characters whose storylines would define not just the series but the entire franchise for decades to come. Derek Wheels Wheeler begins as the quiet bass player in the Zit Remedy, more sidekick than central figure. But his life takes a devastating turn in Season 3, when his adoptive parents are killed in a drunk driving accident while he's secretly skipping out to record a demo with Joey and Snake. This tragedy transforms Wheels into one of the franchise's most tragic figures, forcing him to grapple with grief, guilt, and the feeling of being abandoned. His storyline doesn't shy away from the ugly side of grief. He becomes rebellious, skips school, clashes with his grandmother, and even runs away, hitchhiking across rural Canada in a desperate attempt to find his birth father. Along the way, he encounters yet another predatory adult, a chilling reminder that Degrassi never let its characters escape the dangers of the world. When he finally finds his biological father, Wheels discovers the fantasy doesn't match reality. His dad has a new life, and little interest in taking in a teenage son. The arc ends with Wheels returning home, realizing there's no quick escape from grief, only the slow work of survival. Spike's arc, meanwhile, gave Degrassi its boldest storyline, a 14-year-old becoming pregnant. This was unheard of on television at the time. Christine Spike Nelson wasn't a major player when she debuted, but her pregnancy instantly made her one of the most important characters in the series and the entire franchise. The storyline refused to trivialize or glamorize her situation. Spike was kicked out of school, isolated by peers, and forced to consider adoption versus keeping the baby. Her boyfriend Shane proved unreliable, floundering under the pressure of fatherhood. In one of the show's darkest turns, Shane took acid at a concert, fell from a bridge, and suffered permanent brain damage, essentially writing him out of the story and leaving Spike to shoulder responsibility alone. Spike's pregnancy wasn't a temporary arc. It reshaped the entire Degrassi timeline because her daughter Emma would later become the protagonist of Degrassi: The Next Generation. In that sense, Spike's story wasn't just groundbreaking for its time. It became the cornerstone of the franchise's continuity. Together, Wheels and Spike embody what made Degrassi Junior High unforgettable: the willingness to show teenagers dealing with devastating, life-altering events without safety nets, without tidy resolutions, and without adults swooping in to fix things. They weren't cautionary tales meant to scare viewers straight, they were honest portraits of what could happen. And that honesty resonated far beyond the 1980s. While Wheels and Spike gave the show its most defining arcs, Degrassi Junior High thrived on its ensemble cast, and the way even minor characters got moments in the spotlight. Arthur and Yick, for instance, were the classic nerdy pair, bullied in the stereotypical 80s fashion but also given storylines that touched on deeper themes like cultural identity and self-acceptance. Lucy, the stylish, independent girl with absentee parents, embodied the latchkey kid archetype, while Caitlin Ryan became an icon for fans with her activism, her epilepsy storyline, and her later role in franchise-defining romances. Melanie's awkward crushes, Heather and Erica's twin dynamics, and countless small arcs gave texture to the school, making it feel like a real community rather than a set of background extras orbiting a few leads. And then, of course, there was the Zit Remedy, the hilariously inept band formed by Joey Jeremiah, Wheels, and Snake. Their one and only song, Everybody Wants Something, became one of the most iconic elements of the series, not because it was good, but because it perfectly captured the earnestness of teenage boys, convinced of their own musical genius. Watching them rehearse endlessly, argue about their band name, and record demo tapes was both cringeworthy and endearing, adding levity to a series often bogged down by heavy subject matter. But the ensemble wasn't just for comic relief. Through these side characters, Degrassi tackled a wide range of issues: bullying, racism, sexism, homophobia, eating disorders, strict parenting, teen drinking, and more. Some storylines were clumsy, reflecting the limits of 1980s television, but others were surprisingly nuanced, like Caitlin confronting her teacher's rumored sexuality and realizing her own biases. The brilliance of this approach was that it made every viewer feel seen. You didn't have to identify with Wheel's grief or Spike's pregnancy to find yourself in Degrassi. Maybe you related to Arthur's awkwardness, Melanie's insecurities, or Caitlin's passion for activism. This ensemble-driven storytelling gave the show a richness and unpredictability that kept audiences hooked. At its core, Degrassi Junior High wasn't just about a handful of kids navigating adolescence. It was about an entire school, with every hallway hiding another story, every student carrying another struggle. And by giving even its side characters room to shine, Degrassi created a living, breathing world that felt more authentic than anything else on television. When Degrassi Junior High ended in 1989 with the shocking image of the school literally burning down during a dance, it was more than just a dramatic cliffhanger. It was the symbolic passing of the torch to the next phase of the franchise, Degrassi High, and the cementing of Degrassi's place in television history. But to understand its legacy, you have to look at what made it so different from anything that came before. At its core, Degrassi Junior High refused to compromise on realism. In an era when teen shows either leaned into sitcom fluff, Saved by the Bell, or glossy soap operas, 90210 just a year later, Degrassi stood apart by showing kids who looked awkward, acted awkward, and lived through problems that weren't neatly resolved. The absence of polished wardrobes, the rawness of the acting, the lack of adult saviors, and the willingness to confront taboo subjects, pregnancy, sexual harassment, alcoholism, racism, abuse, made the series not just relatable but groundbreaking. Its camera work even reinforced the ethos, always shot at the eye level of its teen characters, never elevated to an adult's perspective, literally positioning the audience alongside the kids rather than above them. Contemporary critics noticed this. In 1988, the New York Times praised the show for its commitment to realism, noting that teachers and parents were never without youngsters and never given equal screen time. This was radical. The show wasn't for adults. It was for teens. About teens, told through their lens. And the impact on viewers was massive. For teenagers watching in the 1980s, Degrassi was often the first time they saw their own struggles reflected on screen without condescension. For parents and educators, the show sparked conversations they often avoided, from teen sex to child abuse to eating disorders. And for the television industry, it set a new precedent, that there was value, both artistic and cultural, in telling teen stories authentically. The influence of Degrassi Junior High rippled outward into later teen dramas. Without it, there is no Degrassi High, no Degrassi. The Next Generation, no blueprint for shows like Skins or Euphoria that leaned into raw authenticity and unresolved messiness. Its theme song, relentlessly upbeat even after devastating cliffhangers, became symbolic of adolescence itself. Chaos and tragedy colliding with relentless hope. Its storytelling model, ensemble-driven, rotating focus, issues that linger rather than resolve, became the DNA for countless successors. And most importantly, its legacy lives in the loyalty of its fans, who decades later still remember the characters, the arcs, and the raw emotions it stirred. Spike's pregnancy didn't just make history, it gave birth, literally and narratively, to the next generation. Wheel's grief didn't just devastate audiences, it proved teen drama could handle tragedy with honesty. Stephanie K's endless stumbles didn't just frustrate viewers, they validated the cycle of mistakes every teen goes through. And the endless loop of Everybody Wants Something by the Zit Remedy didn't just make us laugh. It reminded us that even in the darkest storylines, adolescence always finds room for humor, cringe, and dreams too big for the talent behind them. In the end, Degrassi Junior High's greatest legacy is that it respected teenagers. It didn't talk down to them, didn't clean up their reality for adult comfort, and didn't shy away from pain. Instead, it showed that teenagers could carry their own stories, in all their awkward, messy, unresolved glory. And in doing so, it changed television forever. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Degrassi Junior High, the scrappy little Canadian series that punched far above its weight and rewrote the rules of teen television. From Stephanie Kay's desperate search for popularity to Kathleen's haunting unresolved pain, from Wheel's devastating loss to Spike's groundbreaking pregnancy, and from Joey Jeremiah's endless schemes to the Zit Remedy's unforgettable one-hit wonder, this was a show that dared to let kids be kids, awkward, flawed, and messy, but also resilient, brave, and unforgettable. Its impact didn't stop in the 1980s. It set the stage for everything that came after, proving that teenagers deserved stories that reflected their real lives rather than sanitized versions of them. And maybe that's why it still resonates decades later. Because no matter when you grew up, those awkward, messy middle school years remain universal. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your favorite Degrassi Junior High memory down in the comments. Which storyline stuck with you the most? Was it Spike's pregnancy, Wheel's grief, or maybe the hilarious absurdity of the Zit Remedy's eternal rehearsal sessions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel. And remember, everybody wants something, but here, we're never giving up.